Welcome to Absolute Scenes, our series of reviewing the IMDb's bucket list of 100 films to see before you die. Today, we've got The Kid, directed and starring Charlie Chaplin in 1921.
Mitchell, did you have any expectations going into this film before? Have you ever seen this film before?
I've never seen this film, and I've got to admit, I'm not exactly a fan of silent movies, so I was probably coming in with a bit of a disposition of thinking this isn't going to be so good. So that's where I was coming from. What about you?
I sat and watched it with my girlfriend, and as I put it on, I basically said, look, if it's not very good, it's only 55 minutes of our lives. We can get through it. It'll all be all right. So, yeah, it was a negative start. I'm with you. I don't think I've ever actually seen a silent film in my life. I've seen a few films from this era before. My dad forced me to watch Marx Brothers films when I was growing up, and I really like the Marx Brothers, but there's definitely some conversations going on there at least. So it was something that was really alien to me. I've never seen a Charlie Chaplin film. I've seen the famous scene from The Great Dictator that Paolo Nutini used in Iron Sky, so which is amazing, incredible, and obviously he's like a national treasure, Charlie Chaplin. So I'm really happy that whether I liked it or not, I got to sit down and have the opportunity to watch it. Like going into it, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what the story was. I didn't have a look at any synopsis. I didn't have a look at any critical audience reception to it. Obviously, it's in a bucket list, so I imagined it's going to be fairly good. But that was it. I thought it might be one of those nostalgia picks. Like lots of people think, oh, it's technically great, so I must enjoy it. And that was my mindset going into it. Maybe a bit pretentious. That's what I thought it could be. Is that the same for you?
I wouldn't go so far as pretentious. I mean, he was a worldwide megastar of the time, and it must have catered to the kind of popular opinion of what made a good film at the time, much to what we get these days with a blockbuster film. So I think there's always going to be a bit of a merit when you look back at something that you think it's an arty type film because it's black and white, because it's silent. But if you're trying to judge it at the point in time that people are watching it, then you've got to view it as it being a mega smash movie, which
a mega smash movie.
I don't know if I'd go that far, but he was, he was a huge star of the times, wasn't he? So it was a hugely popular.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, him as an actor, and particularly Trump as a character in a number of recurring movies that he was in. So
he was so famous that he once finished third in a Charlie Chaplin lookalike contest. I don't know if you knew that. That's an actual fact. Going into this, then sat it down, put on. What did you enjoy this? Were the things that you picked out of that you enjoyed?
Ultimately, I think I did enjoy it, but I wasn't sure if I was loving it. I think there was pieces of it that I really liked, and to pick out the purely from a enjoyment point of view, that the slapstick and some of the comedy elements I did enjoy. I mean, there was some bits especially that it only worked in a silent movie. The scene when he's fitting the windows at the policeman's house, and the policeman's like in the house and putting his arm around him, and that wouldn't work if there was actual sound and dialogue, because you can see the policeman shouting at him through the window, but he's not reacting to it. So I think there was some nice pieces of comedy that I liked that only really fit the fact that it was in a silent movie. In terms of other elements of the enjoyment, slapstick. I enjoyed the characters, and I enjoyed the acting of the child. The little scene with the pancake making, and how the child was kind of looking after the tramp almost. The fight scene was quite good. I liked the 1920s portrayal of what a macho boxing man would look like. They hadn't bothered to cast
the arm. I think that was.
Yeah, hadn't bothered to cast a big guy. They just stuck stuff in his top, and I enjoyed that. I enjoyed those kind of things. But did I think the overall story was hugely enjoyable? No, but it was, it was meant to be sadness tinged with comedic parts to it, and I could see the value in that, and I did watch it all the way through, and wanted to see it all the way through, which I guess is a merit of are you in part at least enjoying it slightly. Well, what about you?
One of the things that I made a note of was the same the same but different. You know how you were saying about it being a silent movie and they use that to the advantage? They also used the fact that it was a black and white film to the advantage. So when the policeman's chasing the tramp around and he hides up against the brick wall, like that wouldn't work in colour because it'd be a orange or red brick wall and he's wearing like black or grey clothes because it's all black and white. It works perfectly. So I thought they used limitations to their strength, which I think is absolute genius. I think it's such a clever way of utilizing it. In terms of the acting, I thought it was mixed. So I'll start with the good acting. We'll go on to maybe what I didn't like later. I thought the child actor was absolutely fantastic. Apparently, for the scene where he's crying when he gets taken away, his real life father basically said, "If you don't cry, you will get taken away," and I burst into floods of tears. And I think
is it acting at that point though? Or is that just a real behavior?
Well, Leonardo DiCaprio won an Oscar for The Revenant when he was just freezing cold and actually ate some bear meat, I think. So if it was good enough for Leo, I think it's good enough for this kid. Method acting, it's called, Mitchell.
Yeah.
Come on. And I think the story probably would have been original in 1921. Obviously, it's frightening to say this, but it was 100 years ago. So just for anyone that's sort of wondering what the basic element of the plot is, Charlie Chaplin plays a tramp who comes across an abandoned baby, tries to get rid of it unsuccessfully, and then slight jump in time, and it's how he raises the child or the kid, and essentially how the kid also raises him, and it's just sort of this really nice sort of father-son buddy film, just trying to navigate life in the 1920s. Couldn't tell whether it was England or whether it was the USA, as Charlie Chaplin is from England, but spent a lot of his time in the US. So I wasn't too sure. I didn't try and look too much into it. I didn't want to do too much research that might change what my opinion is on the film. So yeah, I thought it was probably quite original for the time. I think in terms of story structure, it's an absolute masterclass. This is a long time before books about 3 and 5 act structures were written, and it follows that 5 act structure to its absolute limit, and it's brilliant watching it. It needs a film without any dialogue, needs so much structure so that you have a clue what is going on. And I thought that like each scene was fantastic in terms of how he raised the stakes of each scene, where there's conflict and then you think it's getting resolved, but then the conflict gets worse, and then it builds and it builds and it builds. And eventually it takes you to a place where, although you kind of expect in the beginning, because a lot of the things that happen are tropes now, and you kind of know where it's probably going to end, but there's this little middle bit for that journey that I was like genuinely like, oh, how is this happening? How is this happening? I thought it was really clever. And I was absolutely genuinely buckled at the bit where the kid was fighting, and Charlie Chaplin's like, no. And then an adult pulls him away and he's like, oh, I'll go on. And then he starts like giving him tips and all this, and like how all that built up. I was like, we both were like sat there, like actually laughing out loud.
Yeah, I thought that was brilliant when he ended up essentially acting as his corner man, and had him up against the window and he's like dousing him down and things. I thought that was a great juxtaposition of how he started that scene.
It was the transition. There is a slight moment where you see the transition. I tell you who is absolute master of this these days is Will Ferrell, where he's like, everything's fine, and then we have to keep our composure. Sort of scene where it's like, no, come away, and then he gets sort of dragged away, and he's like, well, yeah, you can have him, and then he dictates the tempo of everything. And I was just genuinely really impressed. And obviously, with it being a silent film, the score's really important, and you're in serious danger of it becoming annoying. And I don't think I ever really found it annoying. I think in the first 6 or 7 minutes, I was like, this could get a bit long. And I think after 9 or 10, it was drowned out, and I thought actually it worked really well. I didn't notice it. It was good. In the final thing, just before we maybe transition into some negative points, is because it's both a good point and a bad point. So having looked afterwards, apparently for this film, there is significantly less dialogue written down. So basically a scene might happen and then it's like the words are written for you, basically what's happening or the speech that someone might be using. And this film has notoriously a small amount of that, which I think says a terrific amount for the job that Charlie Chaplin did directing this, in terms of how much we can see, how he is showing us. He doesn't need to tell us what is happening. We can see everything that is happening, and that is like such a massive skill. But then there were little dribs and drabs of dialogue that I thought, I don't need that. Like, I actually don't need that. I know what's going on, so trust me a little bit more to watch it.
There is an element of it. I mean, that dialogue that comes on the screen, and you were talking about the skill and the mastery to move the story along. But what did you think of, without any dialogue, the ability to portray the emotion of the characters, and particularly how him as a director and how he wants you to feel? Because that's an almost instant thing in this film, where the first 2 minutes the mother's given up the child and you're shown a kind of 30-second snippet of the father of the child, and in that 20-30 seconds, with no dialogue, Charlie Chaplin's trying to portray that father has dismissed and forgotten the child, the way the photo falls in the fire and he just kind of throws it away. I think it's very clever without any dialogue, and really quickly to immediately see the emotion that he wants you to understand as the viewer. And I think that was very clever without any dialogue, as well as just telling the story.
You've hit the nail on the head, and that's exactly what it is. He's a master at showing you things. He doesn't need to say, oh, thank God I've got rid of her. I'll drop her photo in the fire, look at it and not be bothered and just sort of smile. And then in the next scene, the mother's crying and then she's giving up. And you kind of know what's going on. I was a little bit skeptical first sort of 5 minutes when she leaves the baby in a car and people drive. I'm like, where is this going? And obviously one thing that is a little jarring is it's all speeded up. So the frame rate's much faster. And then when there is an emotional scene, you kind of want the frame rate to slow down. So you're just with it, because the frame rate obviously is to help you get through the film. It's 55 minutes. If it was at a normal frame rate, it probably would be an hour and 20, and that'd be really difficult to sit through. And also it heightens comedy when everything's like a little bit faster. But when you've got like a poor lady crying and it's like everything's really quick, it's just like, that would have been nice if maybe they could have slowed down. I'm not sure how that would have worked. But it does come into a next point, and that is, when you are portraying everything through emotion and acting without dialogue, you are in danger of overacting. And I felt that the mother in the beginning was like rubbish, basically. I didn't find her acting at all convincing. It was all very, oh. And I was like, really? But obviously, I think it's a bit like stage acting, where sometimes you've got to penetrate the screen into the audience, and because there's no dialogue, you have to do it. So I understood it, but I still feel that it is a film, so I can't say, well, you could have been more subtle. As she got less despairing throughout, I thought her performance massively improved, but at the beginning, I wasn't too impressed. Was there anything that like you didn't really like about, like, you were specifically like, oh, I actually don't like this?
I mean, just to pick up on your acting point there, I think there is an element of overacting at the start, particularly with her character. But I think that's driven by, she's got a very short time to portray. Is she happy with giving this child up? Is it kind of under duress? How does she feel about it? And it's very hard to do that in a way of putting the child in a car, which obviously she's perceiving as is going to be a rich person and they're going to give the child a good upbringing. It's difficult to portray how she feels about that unless she's doing that whole, oh, I'm so sad about this, kind of overacting.
I don't like, she could have like sat there and just had tears down her face, but yeah, I mean, I suppose a bit of a nitpick. Was there anything else that you were unsure of going through the film?
Yeah, I don't think you can not talk about this film and say things you don't like without talking about the dream sequence. I mean, I just don't see where it fits in the film. I was watching it. I was watching it, trying to think what am I meant to be taking from this this film, from this scene of the dream. And you know, that's the point at which the child's been taken away from him to be reunited with his mother. And you're now watching the tramp. And I wasn't sure if you were meant to feel sorry for the tramp, if you were meant to think that it appeared he was happy with this existence that he had, but he was actually like everyone else, and he was dreaming of different things. But then when the kind of devil and sin character came into the dream, I was just at a complete loss of what I was meant to be taking from it and what it was adding to the film at that point. And I don't feel it really offered me anything to help me understand the tramp's character or what he was thinking at that point. So do you have an insight on what the hell that was meant to be doing? I don't know.
Yeah, fair play to him. I think he's done his job well, because I've been thinking about it for days. Like, what on earth was that about? When I first watched it, it's a massive negative because I totally switched off. And what was, we're talking about earlier on a masterclass in story structure through acts. This was like a completely different film, and I was like, I'm so invested. I was like genuinely really invested in his relationship with the child's relationship with the mother, where this was going. And then I've got this dream sequence. So for whatever it's worth, whatever conclusions you might come to, I just think it was a really bad choice. Thinking about it over the last couple of days, the closest I can get to, and this might be completely wrong, is that there's clearly an angels and devil demon sequence going on, and it's shown the child as an angel, and when the child leaves, it shows sin and the demons and the devils taking hold of the tramp. So the only thing I can come up with is that the kid is Charlie Chaplin's savior in a world full of sin and vice, and essentially his world is hell without this angel child. I'm not going to lie, though, it took several days for me to, and I've purposely not been online to look at anything, because that sort of defeats the point. Like, we're too layman. That's the entire point of this. Like, I'm sure if you have a film degree, you don't need to listen to us two speak and talk about the kid. You can just watch it and know everything that's going on. So I think it defeats the point if we start looking into things. And ultimately, I shouldn't, for a silent movie that thematically doesn't have too much going on. It's a feel-good film, 55 minutes long.
Do you think it's a feel-good film? I don't know. It's quite sad.
I do.
All the time.
I think, yeah, like, just
happy,
because
a happy ending, perhaps.
Yeah, for sure. Like, yeah, they've both lived hard lives, but I'm sure that was the case for a lot of people in the early 20s. And when it comes to it, for later on, I think they're going to have a happier ending as three people could wish for, given the circumstances at the start of the film. But I think like I was saying, if it's going to take you several days to interpret a dream sequence you didn't like, I don't think that's a positive at all. I think the limitations of it being a silent movie, I thought the mother character was a little bit underdeveloped at the beginning as well, because even though it is a silent film, I thought Charlie and the kid, the tramp and the kid, I feel like I've known them my whole life. Like, I did feel like I knew who they were, what they wanted, what they were about. I knew them, even though they didn't say a word, which is incredible. Like, I don't know how he's managed it, but the mother character, I still don't know why should it the child. Like, I've got no idea. I don't know if you noticed. Was there a reason? Did you say? Did I miss it?
It wasn't clear. I mean, we saw her be kicked out of whatever institute she was staying in at the start, but I don't think that was really explored or explained.
And I think the final sort of little negative, which isn't a negative really, but it's obviously some people are different. You do need to concentrate for this. Like, this isn't a stick a film on and go on Twitter or whatever. You need to put your phone away and you need to concentrate. It's 55 minutes of actually watching something, which I enjoyed. I like that. But some people might want to stick something on and you know, they might see Charlie Chaplin comedy, they can maybe look at it, glance away, do something else, glance in. Laughing that hard. I wasn't laughing that much, but there were. I found it was a film that I was just smiling throughout most of, and then there were a couple of bits where I did laugh out loud.
Yeah, and I think I'm the same. I mean, I didn't love it, but I think the story was quite nice. It was enough to keep you interested through a silent movie when you, like you say, you're concentrating on exactly what's happening. But I like some of the little comedic touches. I mentioned a few of them before, but also the hole in the blanket and he wears it as a poncho, and I think there's some nice little touches. As you say,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say any of them you're like, I'm going to remember that joke forever, but they make you smile at the time, and I think they're nice touches in what is otherwise during it quite a sad story until that happens.
Yeah,
So,
I know what you mean. So let's get a rating this thing. So we have our two scales to remind everyone. We have the Mitch scale, which is how much we personally enjoyed the film, and what the Muckle scale, which is how good technically do we think this film is. And obviously we'll take into account the fact that it was made 100 years ago. So on the Mitchell scale, what would you give this out of 10? How much did you enjoy it?
yeah, I'm going to give it a 7 on the. As I say, didn't love it, but I was watching it. I was watching a silent movie, and I was interested through to the end enough to want to know what happened in the story. Would I watch it again? No, but enjoyed it enough to watch it all the way through and want to watch it all the way through. Wasn't a chore.
So I agree and disagree. I also give it a 7, and I did also enjoy it all the way through. Again, I think we are spoilt now for storylines, plots, special effects, different types of characters. You know, there's so much literature on how to develop characters that people can do amazing things, and we can get so much satisfaction. And yet, for a silent film with like largely centered around two people that just didn't talk, I really enjoyed it. I'm not going to put it in like my favorite films of all time. I think probably around this sort of mark where it is on the list is probably about right. What would you give it on the Muckle scale? How good is it?
Yeah, I think that's harder for me because not having watched a load of silent films, I'm saying it's very good in terms of moving the story along, portraying the emotion. I don't know if that is a one-off for a silent film or if that's what everyone that was making silent films of the era was able to do in a really skillful manner. So I think that's a bit harder, but definitely I liked the fact that they portrayed it. They managed to do that on a silent movie, so the emotion and the story. I liked the cinematography and the kind of the set. I know that might seem quite strange because it's quite simple, but just some of the little touches, like in his house, they had he had a little calendar just by the door, and whilst I was watching it, I thought they've put that there for a reason, but I just can't work out what it is. But even just little things like that, the state that the chairs were in, and slightly falling apart and things. It appeared to me that thought had gone into everything that was in that scene. Whether I could understand what it was or not, I'm not sure. So I did like those elements. And again, as I said, that mix of slight laugh, slight comedy, slapstick, and there is some genuine sadness, but I don't know how early that was happening before Charlie Chaplin, or whether that was something he was really bringing to the fore at the time. So I'd say all those things are well done, and to portray it in a silent movie, to me, in the same way that people do, probably a lot easier now with dialogue, I'd say it's pretty skillful. So I'd go up. I'd give it an 8.
I've given it an 8.8. So yeah, I think the limitations that they had, Charlie Chaplin around this time used to make much shorter films. This was a longer one. It took a long time to shoot because apparently he's a perfectionist. I think all the things that we touched on earlier, all the things that you've touched on, show just how good this film is. And I'd written everything down, like as soon as I'd watched it, I wrote my notes, did everything so that I could not be swayed. I haven't changed anything about it, irrespective. Everything's my opinion. But whilst I was looking for what our next film is going to be, had a quick look just to see what the critical reviews were. And there are some big time critics saying this is like the best film ever made. It's a perfect film, all that sort of stuff. And they went to film school. I'm sure they know better than us. But from what a layman can say, I think its use of structure, showing, not telling. I think a lot of it in terms of the cinematography, like you're saying, is actually, or in terms of the sets, maybe not the cinematography, is it was just set in the 1920s. They don't have to create things. What we are seeing isn't necessarily a costume. It is just what people are knocking around in. So I thought, like, I was fascinated by that. I was genuinely like, it's amazing that we've got this in film, sort of thing. So yeah, I just think it was, some of the things in there were elements of a masterpiece. Things like the random dream sequence. You can be as pretentious as you like. That isn't good. And it might show an inner monologue of how Charlie Chaplin is feeling whilst he's dreaming, which is the good segue into it, which is how it's viable so that it's believable. It's not stretching your belief like, oh, how has this happened? It's not a musical. Why are people jumping around like this? It's he's fallen asleep. But still, when for 40 minutes you've had nothing like that, and then suddenly you're meant to be dealing with that in a monologue, those feelings, and it's not really given any context, it sucks you out of such a well-structured plot. And that is why I would give it, like, not a 9 or a 10 or anything, but yeah, I'd say 8.8.
This has been Absolute Scenes with Mitch and Muckle. We've been reviewing The Kid by Charlie Chaplin, number 100 on the top 100 IMDb bucket list films of all time. I've given it a 7.5. Muckle's given it a 7.9. Do you agree with one of us and not the other? Or are we both absolutely incorrect? Let us know in the comments. If you've enjoyed today's video, please join us next time and for the next 99 episodes as we review all 100 off the list. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel and we'll see you next time.